Hey there, sleepyheads. Welcome back to the channel. Before we drift into tonight's tale of the Clockmaker's secret, I'd love to know where in the world you are watching from tonight. And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right, lights low, blankets up, let's begin. The town was small enough that every sound carried, yet quiet enough that no one ever spoke loudly. If you stood in its square at dusk, you could hear the layered murmur of hundreds of clocks, from the tallest tower's bronze bells to the soft wooden tick of kitchen wall clocks nestled in every home. Each one ran differently. Each one told its own truth about time. Some ticked fast, as if eager to meet tomorrow. Some lagged behind, unhurried and content to linger in yesterday. And somehow, that suited the people just fine. Because here, in this place tucked between river and mountain, time was not something chased, it was something lived with. Like a gentle neighbor, always nearby, always patient. The cobblestone streets shimmered in the fading light. Oil lamps began to bloom in doorways, their glass shades glowing amber, casting halos that stretched across the square like sleepy suns. At the heart of the town stood a narrow building, with brass-framed windows and a door the color of weathered oak. Above it hung a sign, its paint faded by rain and years. Yet the letters remained precise, as if hand-carved by time itself. It read, Hassan the Clockmaker. Inside, the world was smaller, warmer. The air carried the faint perfume of polished wood and machine oil, and the shelves were alive, not with noise, but with rhythm. Hundreds of clocks, grandfather clocks with deep, sonorous heartbeats, tiny carriage clocks ticking in high, polite tones, and pocket watches whispering secrets behind glass domes. Each sound folded into the next, until the shop seemed less a room and more a living orchestra of time. And at its center, under the soft gleam of an oil lamp, sat Hassan. He was old, though not frail. His hair, silver as moonthread, was tied neatly at the nape with blue silk. His hands, dark and delicate, moved with the memory of decades, steady, precise, reverent. He wore spectacles that magnified the reflection of gears and cogs, and as he worked, his breath followed the same rhythm as the clocks around him. Tick, inhale, tock, exhale. There was a kind of grace to it, as though he were part of the machinery himself, a soul caught in harmony with the passage of moments. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his voice was calm, like the last ripple on a pond long after a stone has fallen. Children who passed by his window often pressed their faces to the glass, watching the delicate choreography of his tools. The tweezers lifting a single gear, the slow turn of a key, the flicker of lamplight over polished brass. And sometimes, if they were lucky, they'd see him pause to listen. Not to a customer, not to the street outside, but to the heart of a clock he just brought back to life. Among all the glittering shapes and soft tick-tock voices, one clock stood apart. It rested under a glass dome near the far corner, half bathed in shadow, half kissed by the evening light that crept through the blinds. Its face was carved from rosewood, dark, smooth, and faintly luminous, as if it held a memory of warmth even when untouched. Its hands were gold, thin as a sigh, delicate as eyelids just before sleep, and around its circular frame was engraved a pattern of stars, small, precise constellations that curved in quiet spirals, like a map of a sky that never quite stood still. But unlike every other clock in the shop, this one made no sound. No tick, no chime, no pulse of movement. It was a clock that did not count time, and yet somehow, it felt more alive than all the others. People often asked about it. Travelers, villagers, children too curious for their own good. They'd point through the glass dome and say, "Master Hassan, Why does that clock not move? And he would smile, the kind of smile that belongs to both joy and sorrow. Then softly he would answer, "Not all clocks are meant to measure time." And that was all he ever said. It wasn't the kind of answer that satisfied a mind, but it always seemed to settle a heart. People left his shop quieter than they arrived, as though some invisible weight had been lifted by words they didn't fully understand. At sunset, when the last customer had gone and the golden light had turned the shop into a dream of shadows, Hassan would light a small lamp on his desk. Its flame trembled like a heartbeat, steady but shy. He would take the glass dome off the silent clock, wipe the rosewood face with a cloth so soft it looked like mist, and whisper something, a word no one else could ever hear. Then, for a long while, he'd simply sit there, eyes closed, listening to the silence. A silence that wasn't empty, a silence that had shape and warmth and memory. Sometimes, when the night deepened and even the smallest clocks began to blend into the hum of dreams, that silence would change. It would grow faintly musical, not a tune but a vibration, a feeling that seemed to fill the chest, like the softest sigh. And though no one else ever heard it, it was said that when Hassan sat with that clock, the air itself forgot to rush forward. The town's hours slowed. The streets softened. The stars above blinked slower, as if the sky, too, were trying to listen. Once a boy delivering a parcel arrived after closing hours. He pressed his ear to the door, hearing nothing at first, only wind, only the faint dripping of rain from rooftops. But then, beneath that hush, a single tone shimmered, like the first note of a song that had waited centuries to begin. He could not tell if it came from the clockmaker's tools or from the man himself. He only knew that it made him want to breathe slower, to stay, to listen longer. When he finally walked home, the rain had stopped and the air smelled different, like rain had been replaced by time. That night, the boy dreamt of a great clock tower, made of clouds and starlight, and a man standing at its base, holding a key shaped like a crescent moon. When he awoke, the dream dissolved, but the feeling lingered, a soft rhythm beneath his ribs. In the morning, when he passed the shop again, he could have sworn the silent clock's golden hands had shifted just slightly by the length of a breath. Days in the town unfolded like pages in an old book, creased, worn, but loved. Fishermen cast their nets in the silver river. Children ran between olive trees chasing paper kites, and old women told stories that began with, "Once before the clocks began to sing." And through it all, Hassan worked, quietly and endlessly, repairing time one heartbeat at a time. Every clock that left his hands seemed touched by something more than skill. A watch that had run late for years began to match the sunrise again. A mantel clock that refused to chime sang once more, perfectly in tune with the house's morning prayer. It was as if his craft did not merely fix metal, it mended rhythm, restored harmony to the invisible balance between people and hours. Still, as the years passed, the silent clock remained unwound. Its dome gathered a faint ring of dust at its base, as if time had accepted it as sacred ground. And yet, even beneath the dust, it glowed faintly. Not like gold, not like wood polished with oil, but like memory itself, alive, patient, and waiting. There were whispers, of course. There always are. Some said Hassan had once built the clock for a sultan who never returned to claim it. Others said it had been made for a child who never grew up. But the elders spoke more softly, and when they did, they said, "That clock doesn't keep hours, it keeps a soul." No one knew whose. No one dared to ask. And so the clock stayed, watching decades unfold through the same brass-framed window. as seasons passed like dream fragments. Winters left their frost kisses on the panes. Summers filled the shop with dust motes that danced like golden rain. Autumns hummed through the cracks with their cool breath. And springs brought the scent of blooming jasmine that seemed to linger longer near the silent clock than anywhere else. Sometimes when the world outside felt heavy, people would walk past Hassan's shop just to hear the rhythm inside. Somehow, no matter how stormy the sky, the sound of those clocks made everything seem steadier. They said it reminded them that the heart has its own clock, that it beats not by hours but by meaning. And in a world so restless, that was a comfort too rare to forget. That winter, a strange thing began to happen in the town. The clocks in people's homes started to drift ever so slightly from one another. A few seconds here, a minute there. At first, no one noticed. Life moved on in its gentle rhythm, merchants calling across the square, children running between the orange stalls, the muezzin's call threading through the morning air like silk. But slowly, quietly, the harmony of the hours began to slip. The baker's oven rang the wrong bell for dawn. The tower clock struck 12 when the sun still sat low in the sky. Even the river's flow seemed to change its rhythm, its current rushing and hesitating in uneven patterns. It was subtle, but the townsfolk felt it, as if something beneath their lives had shifted, like the heartbeat of the earth skipping a beat. And all the while, in the small shop at the square's edge, Hassan worked, his expression as calm as ever. He noticed, of course. No clockmaker could miss such a thing, but he did not rush to fix it. He simply listened to the ticks that grew uncertain, to the rhythm that trembled ever so slightly, like a tired song trying to remember its tune. One evening, the mayor of the town, a stout man with a mustache shaped like a question mark, came to visit him. "Master Hassan," he said, wiping his brow as he stepped into the warmth of the workshop, "the clocks in our homes are misbehaving. The tower rings wrong, and my wife swears the sun sets earlier than it should. Can you do something about it?" Hassan looked up from his workbench, the soft lamplight reflecting in his round glasses. He smiled faintly and gestured toward the shelves of ticking clocks. "They are not misbehaving," he said gently. "They are listening." The mayor frowned. "Listening to what?" "To us," Hassan replied. "When the people's hearts fall out of rhythm, so does time." The mayor blinked, uncertain whether he was being teased or taught. Before he could answer, Hassan turned back to the silent clock beneath its dome. He placed his hand upon it, and the entire shop seemed to still, as though the air itself had stopped to watch. "All clocks," he whispered, "are only mirrors. They do not create rhythm, they reflect it." The mayor left in silence, half comforted, half confused. And outside, the snow had begun to fall, softly, like time remembering to be kind again. That night, Hassan stayed long after midnight. The glow of his lamp was the only light left awake in the square. He moved between his clocks like a conductor in an invisible symphony, listening to each tick, each tone, as though each one carried a secret language. Now and then, he would write small notes in a leather-bound book, a record of sound, not of numbers. Beside him, the silent clock waited under its dome, its face catching the faint shimmer of snowlight through the window. He reached for the dome and lifted it gently. The sound in the room thinned. He leaned close enough for his breath to fog the glass. "You feel it too, don't you?" he murmured. "The world rushing when it should rest." The clock did not answer, but somewhere deep within its rosewood frame, a faint vibration pulsed, like a whisper caught between heartbeats. Hassan smiled. He placed a tiny brass key beside it, a key he had never used. Then softly he said, "Not yet." When dawn came, the snow lay thick and glittering, and the town seemed wrapped in white silence. Children built towers from ice. their laughter echoing against the walls. The air smelled of coal smoke and bread, and from the clockmaker's shop, the steady pulse of time resumed, soft, measured, forgiving. It was as if the night's stillness had healed the town in its sleep. People said the clocks began ticking in unison again, as if they had sighed in relief together. Even the tower's bronze bell struck true that morning, its sound warm and deep, rolling down the river like a song made of air and memory. That spring, a traveling musician came through the town, a woman with a dulcimer strapped across her back, her hair streaked with silver and sunlight. She lingered outside the clockmaker's shop, listening to the rhythms spilling through the doorway. When Hassan stepped out to greet her, she said with a curious smile, "Your clocks, they play like instruments." He chuckled softly. "Perhaps they are. Instruments of what is already within us." She nodded, as though she understood more than his words revealed. Inside, she wandered among the rows of ticking faces, her fingers brushing the brass rims, her eyes wide with wonder. Then she stopped before the silent clock. "Ah," she whispered, "this one sings, but not with sound." Hassan turned to her, surprised. "You can feel it?" "Of course," she smiled. "It hums with longing." And before he could speak again, she began to play her dulcimer, a slow, lilting melody that seemed to thread itself through the tiny spaces between the clock's beats. One by one, the clocks seemed to adjust their ticks to her rhythm, until the entire workshop pulsed in harmony, like a single living heart. When she finished, the air was shimmering, the moment suspended like dew before sunrise. "There," she said softly. "They remember how to breathe." Then, without waiting for thanks, she smiled, stepped into the sunlit street, and was gone. Hassan stood still for a long time, his hand resting on the silent clock. For the first time in years, he thought he could hear it, a sound softer than any chime, a sound almost human, May. The seasons moved gently, as they always did in the town of whispering hours. Years folded into one another like sheets of parchment. The faces that passed through Hassan's door changed. Children grew up, elders passed on, and yet the rhythm endured. He grew older, yes, but never tired. His hands, though lined and worn, still moved with that same steady grace, the grace of someone who knew that the smallest things keep the world from unraveling. Sometimes on quiet afternoons, he would close the shop door early and walk down to the river. He'd sit on the worn stone steps, watching the sunlight break into ribbons across the current. He never brought a clock with him, but somehow the water's rhythm always matched his own breathing. He would whisper to the wind, "Even this is time." The people of the town had long stopped questioning his habits. To them, Hassan was as much a part of their landscape as the bell tower, the bridge, or the jasmine vines on the old walls. Some said he was blessed. Some said he was lonely. But everyone agreed. His clocks held something more than minutes. They held peace. One late summer evening, a storm began to roll across the hills. The wind picked up like a restless spirit, bending trees and scattering petals through the square. Most shops shuttered early, lamps snuffed out, but Hassan stayed. Inside his workshop, the ticking of his clocks grew uneven, each one faltering, hesitating, as though unsure whether to follow the rhythm of the storm or their master. The rain began to fall in bursts, each drop tapping against the window pane like a question. Then came the thunder, low and distant at first, then closer, shaking the glass domes, vibrating through the wooden floorboards. Hassan rose from his stool and placed both hands on the silent clock. His voice was barely a whisper against the storm's roar. "I know," he said. "It's almost time." The storm raged, but inside he stood perfectly still. His shadow stretched long across the floor, interlacing with the faint reflection of the clock's golden hands. And for one fleeting moment, the faintest shimmer of motion passed across the silent clock's face. A small shift, a breath between worlds. Then the light flickered, and the workshop went dark. When the storm finally passed, the town awoke to stillness. The air smelled of wet earth and cedar. The roofs gleamed with water, the streets clean as polished stone. Children ran to see if the clockmaker's shop had survived the night. They found the door unlatched, the air inside cool and fragrant with rain. Every clock ticked perfectly again, each one in harmony, like an orchestra reunited. And on the workbench, beneath the glass dome, the silent clock gleamed brighter than ever. Its face was warm, its hands frozen at dawn, pointing exactly to the hour when the first birds began to sing. Beside it lay the brass key, untouched. No one saw Hassan that morning. But the townsfolk said that the air around the shop felt alive, as though something unseen was quietly keeping time for the world. As the days passed, the story of the storm became part of the town's rhythm too. People said it had washed away all restlessness, all rush, all need to chase the minutes ahead. The baker rose each day before sunrise, but never hurried his dough. The fishermen returned at dusk, not when their nets were full, but when their hearts told them it was enough. And in the evenings, when the lamps began to glow again across the square, someone always passed by the clockmaker's shop to listen to the gentle golden pulse of the hundreds of clocks that never lost their rhythm again. Yet if you listen very closely, beneath the ticking, beneath the hum of brass and time, you could sometimes hear another sound, a faint wordless whisper, like breath drawn through memory. And though no one could say for certain, most believed it was Hassan, still somewhere within those walls, still keeping watch, still holding the rhythm steady, so the rest of the world could sleep. At night, the moonlight spilled across the cobblestones, soft and silver, casting long shadows that stretched toward the clockmaker's window. Inside, the silent clock glowed faintly in the darkness, its hands unmoving, its constellations carved in rosewood, twinkling like stars reflected in still water. And if the wind blew just right, carrying the scent of jasmine and rain, you might hear it, a heartbeat not of seconds, but of peace. A reminder that time, like love, is not meant to be counted, only kept. In the weeks that followed the storm, the town of Whispering Hours lived in an unusual kind of stillness. It was not silence. The bells still chimed, the river still murmured, the wind still rustled through jasmine and fig leaves. But there was something deeper beneath it all, a pause that seemed to linger between each sound, like the world itself was taking a slow, deliberate breath. The townsfolk called it the hush of Hassan. They said the air outside his shop had changed. If you stood near the window after dusk, you could hear not only the ticking of clocks, but a heartbeat hidden among them, a rhythm that wasn't mechanical at all, something warmer, older, and alive. Children whispered stories that the clockmaker had turned into light, or that the brass key he left behind was waiting for someone worthy enough to use it. Old men shook their heads and said, "Some clocks are not meant to be wound by mortal hands." But one person didn't believe the story was over. Her name was Lena, a quiet apprentice who had once swept the floors of Hassan's shop, back when she was barely tall enough to see over the counter. She remembered the way his hands moved, how he traced invisible circles in the air before tightening a screw, as if aligning the spirit of the clock with the pulse of the world. She also remembered the silent clock, and the way Hassan would look at it as though speaking to someone unseen. When he vanished that stormy night, Lena had come running through the rain, her cloak soaked and her breath catching with fear. But she had found only the open door, the golden key, and the hum of harmony that never left the room. For weeks she returned each evening, not to wind or touch anything, but to listen. Each time she felt the same soft vibration in her chest, as though something was answering her heartbeat with one of its own. One evening, when the sun bled slowly into violet clouds, Lena noticed a stranger in the square. He stood near the fountain, tall and thin, dressed in traveling robes faded by salt and sand. His eyes were the color of smoke, and in his hands he carried a wooden case, long and narrow, etched with faint symbols that glimmered when the light caught them. When he saw her watching, he smiled, the kind of smile that hides an old secret. "Are you the one who keeps the clocks now?" he asked, his voice low and musical. Lena hesitated. "I only watch over them. I don't keep time." The stranger nodded. "Good. Time should never be kept, only understood." He stepped closer, his boots barely making a sound against the stone. "I knew Hassan once," he said, "long ago, before this town learned to listen." Her breath caught. "You knew him?" The man's gaze softened. "I did. We studied the same art, though he learned to make peace with time, and I learned how to chase it." Lena frowned, not understanding. He smiled again, tilting his head toward the shop. "May I see his heart?" "The heart?" He gestured gently. "The silent clock." Inside the workshop, the air felt different that night. Not heavy, not light, just expectant. The stranger set his wooden case on the counter and looked around, his eyes tracing every clock like a man greeting old friends. Lena stood beside the silent clock. The brass key gleamed faintly under the lamplight. "She still hasn't moved," Lena whispered. "She hasn't since the storm." The man reached out, not touching, but hovering his hand an inch above the glass dome. He closed his eyes, listening. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled with reverence. "Do you know what this is, child?" "Hassan called it a mirror," she replied quietly. "He said it reflects what lives within." The stranger smiled faintly. "A mirror, yes, but not of faces, of moments." He lifted the dome carefully, and the air in the room seemed to shift, as though the invisible rhythm of every clock bent toward that one point. Lena felt her heart stutter. The face of the silent clock shimmered, and for the briefest second, she thought she saw movement, a slow turn of its golden hands, like the stirring of a dream. The stranger set the dome aside and opened his wooden case. Inside, wrapped in linen, was a strange object, half compass, half sundial, its rim inscribed with words in a language she did not know. He placed it beside the clock. Immediately, the ticking in the shop changed, not louder, not faster, but deeper, as if every clock had drawn a long breath at once. Lena stepped back, her voice trembling. "What are you doing?" He smiled without looking up. "Listening. Hassan built this to hold stillness, but stillness, too, must move to stay alive." She frowned. "I don't understand." He looked at her, eyes soft and sorrowful. "You will." Then with one steady motion, he placed the brass key into the lock of the silent clock. It turned easily, without resistance, as if it had been waiting. And then, the world exhaled. Every clock in the room went silent at once. The air thickened, the lamplight froze, mid-flicker. Outside, even the wind seemed to stop at the threshold. Lena's pulse raced, but she couldn't move. It was as though sound itself had vanished, not broken, just paused. The man stood perfectly still. The clock before him began to glow from within, a soft amber light that grew and grew, until it spilled across his hands, across the counter, across her face. Then slowly, a faint sound emerged. Not ticking, not chime, a whisper, a voice. "Do not fear the quiet," it said, gentle as a lullaby. "Inside stillness, all things remember how to be whole." Lena's eyes filled with tears. She had heard that voice before. It was Hassan. The man bowed his head, as though greeting an old friend. "You found the rhythm, old one," he murmured, "and you hit it well." The light pulsed once more, then faded, leaving behind only the gentle ticking of the clocks. But now it was different. Each tick was softer, fuller, as if everyone carried a breath of living time. The stranger looked at Lena. His expression was calm, almost tender. "Hassan left you something," he said. He knew one day someone would come who could feel the rhythm instead of measure it. He gestured to the silent clock, now faintly humming again. "She's not meant to keep time. She's meant to keep memory." "Memory," he nodded, "of moments the world forgets. The laughter that fades too soon, the peace before storms, the breath before prayer." He built this clock to hold what can't be written or measured. Lena stared at it, her reflection shimmering on its glass face. It did seem alive, as though every joy, every grief, every sigh ever breathed within the town rested quietly inside it. "But why?" she whispered. "Why would he do that?" The man's eyes lifted to the window, where moonlight spilled like silk across the floor. "Because he knew what all true clockmakers know," he said softly. "That time isn't something that passes. It's something that listens." He turned toward her, his expression suddenly weary. "And if no one listens back, it forgets how to move." Lena shivered, though the room was warm. "So he made the silent clock, to help time remember?" "To remind it," the man corrected gently. "Remind it of kindness, of rest, of moments that matter but are too soft to stay." He smiled faintly. "And to remind us the same." He replaced the dome over the clock and closed his wooden case. As soon as he did, the ticking around them settled again into perfect harmony. The air was lighter, the lamplight steady, the silence rich with warmth instead of emptiness. When Lena looked up, the stranger was fastening his cloak, ready to leave. "Wait," she said, stepping forward. "What should I do with it?" "With her?" He paused at the door, turning just enough for the moon to catch the silver in his hair. "Do what Hassan did," he said. "Listen, and when you hear the rhythm change, don't correct it. Follow it." Then he opened the door, and the night swallowed him like a wave. That night, Lena stayed awake long after the last bell faded. The shop glowed softly in the darkness, the silent clock at its center, like a small golden sun that refused to rise or set. She sat at the counter, her fingers resting against the glass dome, and listened. At first she heard nothing but the familiar ticks. Then, slowly, beneath them, a second rhythm emerged, not from the clocks, but from within herself. Her own heartbeat began to align with the hum of the silent clock, and with every breath she took, the town outside seemed to breathe with her. The windows fogged slightly, the lamp flame dipped. Somewhere in the distance, a cat padded across the cobblestones, and its steps seemed to fall exactly in time with her pulse. She smiled faintly. "I hear you," she whispered. "I'll keep listening." The silent clock shimmered once, like a wink of light from another world. And then, for the first time since Hassan's passing, its hands moved. The next morning dawned pale and gold. Mist curled through the square like breath, soft and unhurried. When Lena stepped outside, she found the air thick with birdsong, not hurried or loud, but calm, rhythmic, almost measured. Even the sparrows seemed to follow some invisible pattern, their wings lifting and dipping in quiet harmony. She smiled to herself. The clocks inside the shop were still ticking perfectly, but she could feel something more now, a pulse beneath everything. The rhythm of the town, of life. Hassan had called it the hidden hour, and now she understood why. It wasn't a moment marked by hands on a clock, but a feeling, a thread that ran between all things, tying them together in ways the eyes couldn't see. As the day grew, people began to notice small changes again. The baker swore his bread rose faster than usual that morning. The bell tower chimed not on the hour, but exactly when the first sunlight hit the bronze. Even the river's surface shimmered with a strange golden hue, as though reflecting a time that wasn't here yet. The townsfolk, curious but comforted, whispered to one another about the apprentice. Some said Hassan's spirit had chosen her. Others said she had become part of the clocks themselves. Lena didn't listen to their rumors. She had begun spending her nights by the silent clock, listening to its hum grow and soften, learning the way it spoke without words. Sometimes it sang in steady rhythm, like a heartbeat full of peace. Other times it faltered, the hum breaking into uneven pulses, not warning her, but asking her to follow. And she did. One evening, as the lamps in the square flickered to life, the silent clock began to tremble faintly under its dome. The vibration was soft like a cat purring, but the air in the workshop shifted as though it had drawn breath. Lena stood slowly, her hand hovering over the glass. "I hear you," she whispered again. The hum deepened. This time she felt it not only in her chest, but behind her eyes, a faint shimmering that bent the edges of the room. And then the ticking changed. Each clock in the shop fell into a rhythm she had never heard before. Not the rhythm of seconds, but something older, slower, vast. It felt like being underwater, like hearing the pulse of the world through waves. Lena's knees weakened. She pressed her hand to the counter to steady herself. Then she saw it. The face of the silent clock began to glow again, and on its glass surface, faint images bloomed. Shadows, shapes, colors swirling like smoke. They weren't numbers or reflections. They were memories. She saw the square in sunlight years ago, children chasing ribbons through the air. She saw Hassan younger, laughing beside the fountain, holding a small bird in his palm as if teaching it to sing. She saw storms, markets, weddings, faces she recognized and some she didn't, all woven into a single seamless motion, each one blending into the next like ripples in time. She leaned closer, entranced. The images slowed, and one memory lingered longer than the rest. It was a workshop, this workshop, but filled with younger voices, laughter, and music. On the workbench sat the unfinished, silent clock, its frame still open, gears gleaming. Hassan stood beside another man, the traveler from before, and together they worked in silence, their movements so in tune it looked like a dance. The memory blurred, then stilled on Hassan's face. His eyes, full of calm fire, seemed to look directly at her through the veil of time. And then he spoke, not aloud, but within her. To listen to time is to love it. To love it is to forgive it. And to forgive it is to become free of it. Lena's heart stilled. She felt tears on her cheeks, though she hadn't noticed them falling. The memory dissolved, leaving only the golden hum. That night she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard echoes, fragments of Hassan's voice, snatches of melody from the clocks, and faint whispers of laughter that didn't belong to the living. It was beautiful, but heavy too, like the world was asking her to hold something vast and fragile. By dawn, she rose and opened the shop windows wide. Cold morning air swept in, and the clocks seemed to sigh with relief. "All right," she said softly, looking toward the silent clock. "I'll follow." She found the brass key still resting beside the dome. Though she had promised herself never to use it, she now felt she was meant to. Not to control, but to understand. She turned the key once. The hum rose like a heartbeat quickening. Light spilled gently across the floor, not blinding, but golden, like dawn poured through water. And then, for the briefest moment, everything around her changed. The walls melted into mist. The ticking faded into distant echoes. The air smelled of rain and iron. Lena stood in a field she didn't recognize, a place between night and morning. Above her, the sky shimmered with stars that drifted slowly, as if each was moving to its own soft rhythm. She looked down. In her hands, she still held the silent clock, but it was open now, its gears spinning freely, light flowing between them like liquid time. She realized then, this wasn't a dream. She had stepped inside the rhythm itself. A figure appeared through the mist, a familiar silhouette walking slowly toward her. Hassan. He looked just as she remembered, though his outlines shimmered faintly, as if made of starlight instead of flesh. He smiled, that same gentle smile. "You listened," he said simply. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. I wanted to understand." "And you did," he said. "That's how it begins." Lena's throat tightened. "Where are we?" He looked around, hands clasped behind his back. Between moments, the space where all hours meet, where every heartbeat ever lived, still echoes. She turned slowly, eyes wide. Everywhere around her, she saw faint outlines of people, laughing, embracing, dancing, praying, each shimmering like light reflected on water. They weren't ghosts, they were memories. The very memories the silent clock had been keeping. Hassan placed a hand on her shoulder. "Do you see now why she must never stop? Without memory, time becomes a desert. It moves, yes, but it forgets where it came from." Lena looked down at the clock in her hands. The light within it pulsed with the same rhythm as her heartbeat. "She's alive," she whispered. "She's listening," Hassan corrected gently. "Always listening, always remembering." He stepped closer, eyes kind. But even memory needs a keeper. Someone who understands that not every second is meant to be measured. Some are meant to be felt. Her breath caught. "You mean?" He nodded. "Yes, it's time." Lena closed her eyes. The hum of the clock filled her chest. And when she opened them again, the field had dissolved. She was back in the workshop. The morning sun filtered through the window, illuminating dust motes that looked like tiny stars. The silent clock sat before her, its dome faintly fogged from her breath. It no longer glowed, but its ticking had changed again. Slower, deeper, in rhythm with her pulse. She felt no fear, only peace. Over the next few days, she began repairing the clocks Hassan had left unfinished. Her hands moved with confidence she didn't know she possessed. She no longer needed to measure. She could feel when the rhythm was right. People noticed. Customers said the clocks she fixed made their homes quieter, their sleep deeper, their dreams softer. The town began to move slower, not with laziness, but with grace. Time had learned to breathe again. And every night before closing the shop, Lena would sit by the silent clock and whisper, "Thank you for remembering." Sometimes, if the lamp burned low enough, she thought she saw a second reflection beside hers, a faint smile, watching quietly from the other side of the glass. Seasons changed once more. The jasmine returned to the walls. The river thawed and sang again. The mayor still came by sometimes, older now, his hair silvered by years. He paused by the door, listening to the peaceful ticking, and murmur, "It sounds alive in here." Lena would smile. "It is." And outside, when night fell, the lamps across the square flickered in perfect rhythm, each one breathing to the same slow heartbeat, as though the town itself had learned the language of time. On the anniversary of the great storm, Lena placed the brass key back beneath the dome, where it gleamed like captured sunlight. She no longer needed it. The clock no longer needed to be wound. Its purpose had shifted, no longer a keeper of hours, but a guardian of stillness. When she closed her eyes that night, She heard Hassan's voice again, soft as wind through the leaves. Time is not an enemy, Lena. It's a companion walking beside you. It doesn't chase it, listens. When you love it, it slows. When you rest, it rests too. She smiled in her sleep. And as the moon rose above the square, the silent clock's hands moved once more. Not forward, not backward. Dusk arrived quietly in the town of whispering hours. The sun slipped behind the tiled rooftops, leaving behind a sky of muted gold and lavender. The kind of twilight that makes you pause mid-step, listening for something just beneath the silence, a promise perhaps, or a secret being whispered by the wind. Inside the little clock shop at the corner of Market Lane, Hassan was oiling the gears of a brass pendulum clock. The scent of metal and cedar oil filled the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of bread baking in a nearby oven. The familiar ticking of countless clocks surrounded him, a soft symphony of time, each beat slightly off from the next, forming a rhythm known only to this peculiar town. He paused, wiping his hands on a linen cloth, and looked toward the door. A faint chime sounded not from any of his clocks, but from the small bell above the shop's door. It was rare for someone to visit at this hour. People came by during the day, when the sun made the brass gleam, and children pressed their faces to the window to watch him work. But dusk was different. Dusk belonged to the clocks themselves. The bell rang once more. Hassan set the cloth aside and walked to the front of the shop. Standing in the doorway was a woman, cloaked in soft indigo fabric, embroidered with tiny crescents and stars. Rain droplets glistened on her shawl like liquid glass. She looked around with quiet wonder, as though stepping not into a shop, but into a memory. "Good evening," Hassan said, his voice low and steady, worn by years yet carrying a kind gentleness. "You're just in time." The woman smiled faintly, brushing a strand of damp hair from her face. "Just in time for what?" "For whatever brought you here," he replied. Her gaze drifted to the rows of clocks lining the shelves, tall grandfather clocks, petite carriage clocks, delicate pocket watches, and one or two so strange they seemed almost alive. Each one ticked with its own personality, some eager, others hesitant, one humming softly as if singing to itself. "I've heard of your shop," she said at last. "Even in cities far from here, they speak of the clockmaker who builds time that listens." Hassan raised an eyebrow, amused. "Time that listens? That's a new one." "It's what they say," she continued, walking slowly through the shop, "that your clocks do not just count seconds, they remember them." Her words hung in the air, and for a heartbeat even the clocks seemed to hesitate, as though listening too. He nodded toward the small table near the counter. "Would you care for tea? The rain might not stop soon." She smiled a tired, knowing smile, and accepted. They sat across from each other, the teapot steaming gently between them. Through the shop window, the lamplight of the town shimmered on puddles, turning the cobblestones into small rivers of reflection. "I don't believe I caught your name," Hassan said, pouring tea into delicate porcelain cups, each painted with faded blue waves. "Layla," she said. "I study stories, old ones, from before people learned to write them down. I suppose that makes me a kind of historian, though not the ordinary kind." Hassan's eyes softened. "A collector of forgotten time." Layla tilted her head. "You might say that." She sipped her tea, then looked up at him. "I came here for something that doesn't exist anywhere else, something they call the clock that does not move." For a long moment, Hassan didn't answer. The only sound was the layered ticking around them. Then, with the faintest of smiles, he said, "Then you've come for the clock that does not move." Her lips curved slightly. "You know it." He nodded, setting his cup down carefully. "Everyone in this town knows it, though few understand what it is. May I see it?" He hesitated. It wasn't a question people usually asked directly. Most visitors only glanced at it from afar, whispering among themselves, afraid to disturb whatever mystery kept it still. But there was something in Layla's eyes, not curiosity alone, but a depth of patience, like someone accustomed to waiting through lifetimes for an answer. He stood, lighting the lamp above his workbench. Come then. They walked to the far end of the room, where the silent clock rested under a glass dome. The lamplight made it glow softly, its rosewood frame gleaming as though freshly polished. Its golden hands were motionless, frozen at 12 past 12. Around its face shimmered a faint pattern, almost invisible like constellations drawn in dust. Layla leaned closer, her breath fogging the glass. It's beautiful, she whispered. It's not the beauty you see, Hassan said quietly. It's the kind you feel when the world goes quiet. She studied it for a long time. And you've never wound it? He shook his head. Not once. But why make a clock that cannot move? He smiled faintly. Who says it cannot? She frowned a little, puzzled. It doesn't tick, it doesn't tell time. Maybe it tells a different kind of time, he replied. Not the one that fits inside hours or days, but the one that lives inside people. He looked at the clock again, his reflection merging with its glass dome. When I made it, I wasn't building a device. I was listening. Some clocks are meant to measure moments. Others are meant to remember them. Layla stepped back, crossing her arms lightly. And which is this one? The one that remembers what we forget to notice. Her gaze lingered on him, part disbelief, part wonder. Do you truly believe that? He chuckled softly. Belief isn't required. It's enough to listen. They stood there in silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but full of quiet questions that don't need answers. Layla took another step closer to the clock. She could almost swear she saw something shift behind the glass, a faint tremor of gold, like the movement of dust in sunlight. But when she blinked, it was still again. She turned to him. Did you see that? Hassan didn't answer. His expression was calm, almost knowing. What was it? She asked. He smiled. The clock listens, remember? It moves when it's heard. Smile. Layla laughed softly, the sound blending with the rain outside. And what did it hear this time? Maybe it heard your question, he said. Maybe it heard your need for an answer. He moved toward a shelf filled with sketches, blueprints, diagrams, pages of looping handwriting. Each one depicted gears and constellations intertwined, like the mechanics of a starry sky. You see, he continued, I once thought time was something to master, that by measuring it, I could understand it. But every time I finished a clock, it seemed to move on its own rhythm. That's when I realized time isn't something we own. It's something that listens back. Layla's eyes roamed over the drawings. You sound like a philosopher disguised as a craftsman. Or perhaps a craftsman who built too long and started thinking, he said with a small grin. The rain softened outside, turning to a gentle mist. The lamps in the street flickered, and a cat darted across the window ledge, leaving tiny paw prints on the glass. Layla found herself drawn back to the silent clock. She placed her hand lightly on the dome and felt a faint vibration beneath her fingertips. Like a pulse. She froze. Hassan didn't move. He watched her with quiet eyes. Do you feel it? Yes, she whispered. It's alive. He nodded slowly. Everything listens if you give it the patience to be heard. Her hand trembled slightly. But if it's alive, then what does it want? Not want, he said softly. Remember. She looked up at him. Remember what? He met her gaze. The moment that began it. For a while they both stood in silence. The only sound was the soft sighing of rain against the roof. Layla finally spoke. You said you made it while listening. Who or what were you listening to? Hassan's eyes grew distant, his expression shifting the quiet of someone standing at the edge of memory. He ran his fingers along the table's edge. Once, he said, there was a sound that time itself stopped to hear. A voice that could make even gears pause. The clock was my attempt to keep that sound from fading. Layla leaned forward, voice gentle. A person? He smiled faintly. Perhaps. Or perhaps something even quieter, than that the echo of love itself. His words fell like soft notes in the air, lingering between them. Layla looked back at the silent clock, her reflection faint in the glass. For the first time, she felt an odd certainty that this clock wasn't broken. It was waiting. Waiting for the right question to be asked, the right story to be told, or perhaps the right memory to return. And somehow, deep inside her, she sensed that the moment was coming. The hands of the silent clock glinted faintly under the lamplight, frozen, yet almost breathing. And somewhere between the ticking of all the other clocks, she thought she heard a whisper, like a sigh carried through the gears. Not all stillness is silence. The rain had slowed to a fine mist, its rhythm like the pulse of the night itself, soft, steady, endless. Inside the clock shop, lamplight trembled across the walls, turning brass gears and glass faces into tiny suns and moons. The faint hum of time filled every corner, yet in the space between those sounds, something else began to breathe a quiet anticipation. Layla still stood before the silent clock. Her hand lingered on the dome, as though afraid to break the fragile spell that hung between them. "It's strange," she whispered. "It doesn't feel cold." Hassan's eyes lifted to meet hers. Because time isn't cold. Only people make it so, when they rush through it. He stepped closer, his voice low and calm, like a story told at the edge of sleep. "Do you know what makes this clock different from all the others?" She shook her head slowly. "It doesn't measure passing time," he said. "It measures presence, the stillness between heartbeats, the pause between thoughts, the quiet before words." Layla smiled faintly. "That sounds more like poetry than mechanics." "Perhaps they are not so different," Hassan replied, his lips curling at the edge. "Both try to hold on to something that slips away." She tilted her head. "Then why hide it? Why keep it silent under glass?" His eyes softened. "Because silence is fragile, and because people often break what they don't understand." The rain's whisper deepened, threading through the shop's half-open window. Layla wrapped her arms around herself, her gaze returning to the clock. "Do you ever wish you could wind it?" "I've thought about it," Hassan admitted, "but every time my hand reaches for the key, I stop. I remember something my teacher once told me, that a clock is a promise. Once you start it, you must let it run its course." He sighed, looking out into the wet night. "And some promises are not meant to be kept yet." Shakum. For a long while, neither spoke. The light dimmed, the shadows lengthened, and the world outside seemed to fade into a watercolor wash of silver and gray. Finally, Layla broke the silence. "You said it measures presence. Whose presence?" Hassan hesitated. His fingers traced the rim of his teacup, and his expression grew distant, touched with something like reverence or sorrow. "Someone who once filled the space between every second," he said quietly. "Someone who taught me that time isn't the ticking of clocks. It's the feeling that lingers when moments refuse to fade." Layla's breath caught in her throat. She must have been very special. She was. He smiled, and for the first time that evening, there was a faint tremor in his voice. Not weakness, but the weight of memory. She painted constellations. Not in the sky, of course, but on paper, on walls, on anything she could find. She believed that stars were just the dreams people left behind. His eyes drifted toward the silent clock. "When she became ill, I built her small clocks to keep her company. One for each sound. She loved the river outside her window, the laughter of children in the street, the creak of the floor at dawn. Every tick was a fragment of her world." Layla's voice softened. "And the silent one? That one was for the sound I feared losing most her breathing." The words hung in the air like a candle flame, delicate and unmoving. The shop felt suddenly sacred, like a chapel built from gears and glass. "She asked me," Hassan continued, "to make one last clock. But let it sleep," she said. "Let it stay still, so that even when I'm gone, the world will hold one heartbeat unspent." Layla's eyes shimmered in the lamplight. So you never wound it? He shook his head. I couldn't. I thought if I left it still, I could keep her here between one breath and the next. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes from both love and ache. It sounds foolish now. It doesn't, Layla said gently. It sounds human. Yes. Outside, thunder rumbled far away, not angry, but deep and slow, like the turning of the earth. Layla turned back to the silent clock. Has anyone else ever touched it? Hassan hesitated. Only once, he said. Years ago, a boy from the village ran in here during a storm. He hid behind my counter while the rain poured. His hand brushed the glass dome without knowing what it was. Layla leaned forward. And? The next morning, his mother told me he dreamed of floating lights, hundreds of them, spinning in silence like stars underwater. He woke up saying he heard time breathing. Layla smiled softly. Children are closer to mystery than we are. Perhaps, Hassan said. Or perhaps the clock simply chooses who to speak to. She studied him closely. Do you believe it's alive? He didn't answer right away. He walked to the wall where an old pocket watch hung on a nail, its chain tangled in cobwebs. Alive is a difficult word, he murmured. But yes, everything made with love carries a pulse, even silence. The lamp flickered once as if reacting to his words. The shadows shifted, gliding across the shelves in soft ripples. Layla blinked, and for an instant, she thought she saw something moving behind the silent clock's face. A shimmer of light, faint as moonlight on water. A reflection that didn't belong to the lamp. Her voice dropped to a whisper. It's glowing. Hassan turned, but instead of surprise, a calm understanding crossed his face. It's listening, he said. To what? To your question. Layla frowned. I wasn't asking. You were, he said quietly. You just didn't speak it aloud. A hush filled the room, a living, breathing silence that hummed like the air before dawn. The hands of the silent clock twitched. Barely just a fraction of movement, but enough to make the golden reflections dance across the glass. Layla gasped softly. Did you see that? He nodded. It does that sometimes, when someone truly listens back. Listens back? He stepped closer. Time listens to us as much as we listen to it. Every wish, every hesitation, it lingers somewhere. The clock doesn't move for sound, it moves for meaning. Layla swallowed. And what did it hear from me? He smiled, a longing. Her heart skipped. For what? To remember something you've never forgotten, he said, even if you don't yet know what it is. For a long moment, neither spoke. The ticking of the other clocks faded, their rhythms aligning with something deeper, the sound of breath, the quiet pulse of being. Layla's eyes grew distant. She thought of her own life, endless journeys from library to ruin, chasing myths through dust and ink, always searching for fragments of forgotten truth. Yet here, surrounded by ticking hearts of brass and wood, she felt something new, stillness. Tell me, she said softly, if it's true that the clock remembers presence, what happens when it remembers too much? Hassan looked down at the floor, his expression unreadable. It dreams. Layla blinked. Dreams? Yes, he said, his voice almost a whisper. Every once in a while when I'm working late, I hear it hum. Not ticking, not moving, just a soft vibration, like breath caught in glass. I think it dreams of the moment it was made, of the hands that touched it first. He brushed his fingers over the dome, barely grazing the surface. When I listen closely, it feels as though she's still here, not as memory, but as rhythm. Layla felt a chill run through her. You mean the woman you built it for? Yes, he said simply. She's a secret it keeps. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The town was asleep, the streets shining like silver ribbons under the lamplight. Layla turned toward the door. Then the night had deepened into that quiet hour where the world seems to forget itself. Rain still whispered faintly against the windows, though it sounded more like a memory now, soft, almost shy, as if afraid to wake the sleeping town. Inside the clock shop, the lamps burned low, their light golden and gentle. Hassan stood at his workbench, staring at the key that lay in his palm, the small brass relic shaped like a crescent intertwined with a feather. It was warm to the touch, though it hadn't been near flame or hand for years. He traced its curves with his thumb, remembering the day it was forged. The sound of the bellows, the scent of hot metal, the laughter that filled the room. Back then, a laughter that now existed only in the spaces between ticks and tocks. Behind him, the clocks murmured softly in their uneven symphony. One ticked faster than it should, eager and bright. Another ticked slower, patient as an old tree watching the seasons pass. And somewhere, almost beneath hearing, came a faint hum, steady, gentle, alive. It came from the silent clock. Hassan turned toward it, eyes catching the glimmer of the rosewood frame. Its face seemed to shift subtly under the lamplight, the etched constellations faintly glowing, as if the stars themselves were stirring awake. He whispered, "So, you've heard her too, haven't you?" Outside, the street was empty, except for one figure moving through the mist. Layla walked slowly, her shawl pulled close, her thoughts tangled with everything she had heard that evening. The clocks had followed her even into the rain, not their sound, but their feeling. Each drop of water seemed to fall in rhythm with the heartbeats of time, echoing softly against the cobblestones. She reached the small bridge near the market square, where water streamed beneath like molten glass. Leaning against the railing, she exhaled deeply. She had come searching for forgotten time, but what she found was something else, something more fragile. A love story carved into gears in silence. A man who spoke to absence as though it could still answer. And now she couldn't stop thinking about that key. It wasn't just an instrument of motion, it felt like a threshold. A doorway between memory and moment, between the stillness of grief and the movement of understanding. She looked up at the sky. The clouds were parting, revealing faint stars glimmering in pools of mist. The same constellations she had seen etched on the clock's face. A chill ran through her. The stars weren't random, they were a pattern she recognized. Years ago, while studying an old manuscript in a remote desert monastery, she had seen that same configuration. It was called the Map of Returning, a pattern said to represent the journey of souls that linger too long in the space between time and dream. Layla's breath caught. The clock wasn't just a mechanism. It was a map, a memory written in starlight. She turned back toward the shop, her pace quickening as the realization settled over her like a tide. When she reached the door, the lamps inside were still burning. Through the window, she saw Hassan sitting at the bench, the brass key turning slowly in his fingers. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then pushed the door open. The bell above it gave a small musical chime like a single drop of sound falling into silence. Hassan looked up. "I thought you had gone home," he said softly. "I tried," she replied, her voice breathless but calm. "But I think I understand something about the clock and about what you built." He gestured for her to come closer, curiosity glinting in his tired eyes. "Go on." She stepped into the warm light of the workshop, her shawl damp from the rain. "The pattern on the clocks faced those stars. I've seen them before." "Stars?" "Yes," she said. "They form a constellation known in ancient charts as the Map of Returning. It's a symbol for transition, for the movement between worlds, between memory and what lies beyond it." Hassan's hand froze around the key, his brow furrowed. "The Map of Returning?" "I think she knew," Layla continued softly. "The woman you built it for, she must have known what she was asking you to make. Not a timepiece, but a vessel. A way for presence to remain, even when form could not." He stared at her, the words sinking deep, unshakable. "Do you mean," he swallowed, "that she's still here?" Layla's gaze moved to the silent clock. "Maybe not here the way we understand it, but yes, somewhere inside it, waiting. Not asleep, but listening." Hassan's fingers trembled slightly. He turned the key once in his hand, the brass catching the lamplight like fire in motion. She always believed, he murmured. She said time wasn't a straight line, that it looped like the orbit of the moon, always finding its way back to the beginning. And perhaps, Layla said gently, this clock is that loop. They stood together before the clock. The lamplight flickered, casting halos of gold across its glass dome. The room felt smaller now, not because the space had changed, but because time itself seemed to draw in closer, listening. Will you wind it? Layla asked. Hassan didn't answer at first. His gaze lingered on the motionless hands, frozen forever at 12 past 12. He could feel the weight of every year he had spent waiting beside it, every morning of dusting the glass, every night whispering into silence. He had promised her he would let it sleep. But hadn't he also promised her to keep listening? And now, after so many years, the clock was listening back. He took a slow breath. If I wind it, the silence might end. Layla's voice was barely a whisper. And maybe that's what it's been waiting for. He turned the key slowly between his fingers, feeling its grooves smooth from years of being untouched. Then gently, reverently, he placed it into the small keyhole at the clock's base. A faint hum rippled through the air. The glass shimmered as if alive, and every other clock in the shop seemed to hesitate their ticking, aligning for a heartbeat, then stopping altogether. The silence was immense. Soft, endless, breathtaking. Layla's heart pounded. Hassan! He looked at her once, his eyes bright, filled with both fear and peace. Then he turned the key. The moment stretched, silent as snowfall. At first, nothing happened. Then the faintest vibration began to hum through the wooden floorboards, through the glass of the windows, through the bones of the air itself. The stars on the clock's face began to glow faint pinpricks of silver, pulsing in rhythm with the hum. And then a sound. Not a chime, not a tick, but something between a sigh and a melody. A breath drawn from a world behind this one. The room shifted, the air thickened, the glow grew brighter until it washed the walls in soft light. Layla gasped, clutching the edge of the workbench as the shop seemed to dissolve around them. The wooden walls rippled like water. The shelves bent into curves of light. The scent of rain and cedar faded into something else, the fragrance of blooming jasmine and cool night air. When she opened her eyes fully, they were standing not in the shop, but in a vast garden. It was unlike any place she had ever seen. Every flower glowed faintly, petals opening and closing in rhythm with the sound of a distant heartbeat. The sky above them was not dark, but deep indigo, alive with slow-moving constellations. And everywhere the faint chiming of unseen clocks, not mechanical, but organic, as though the very stars themselves kept time. Layla turned in wonder. Where are we? Hassan's voice was soft, almost reverent. Inside the clock. She looked at him, startled. You mean? He nodded slowly. This is what it remembers. They walked slowly along a path lined with glowing gears, half buried in grass, each one turning silently under starlight. Every few steps, they passed a clock suspended in the air, its face reflecting scenes like memories. A child laughing in sunlight. An old woman holding a cup of tea. A young man carving a piece of wood by the window. Each image shimmered, faded, then shifted into another. Layla whispered, "Are these moments yours?" "Not all," Hassan said, watching one of the scenes flicker. "Some belong to others. Every clock I've built carries a fragment of someone's life, their seconds, their breath, their waiting. Maybe this place is where they all come together." Layla stopped before a small clock hanging from a vine. Inside it, she saw a woman with dark hair painting stars on a ceiling. Her smile glowed like dawn. "That's her," she said softly. Hassan stepped closer, his hand trembling. "Yes." He reached out, his fingers barely brushing the light of the memory. The painted stars shimmered, And the woman turned not to him, but to something just beyond him, and smiled as if recognizing his touch. Tears welled in his eyes. "She's still painting." Layla smiled through her own tears. Then time never stopped for her. It just changed shape. The air shimmered again, rippling with warmth. Hassan looked around, realizing that every flower, every clock, every piece of this strange garden pulsed in perfect harmony. "This place," he whispered, "it's alive with her." Layla nodded. "And with you." He turned to her. "With me. You gave it your breath, your hours, your love. You kept it alive by waiting. You didn't stop her. Time you kept her dream breathing." Hassan stared at the glowing landscape, the stars swirling above them like ink in water. "Then this isn't a garden of endings." "No," Layla said softly. "It's a garden of return." The stars swayed gently in the indigo sky above them, moving as if the entire cosmos breathed in rhythm. Each shimmer felt deliberate, as though unseen hands rearranged constellations to form new patterns. The air was warm, tender, almost sacred. Layla and Hassan walked through the garden, slowly afraid that moving too fast might shatter its delicate stillness. Every step felt like a heartbeat, every breath like a prayer. "Does it end somewhere?" Layla asked softly, her eyes following a trail of glowing gears half buried in the soil. Hassan smiled faintly. "I used to think clocks were circles, time going round and round. But now I think maybe they spiral, always moving forward, but always returning to where the heart first began to beat." They stopped before a large archway formed entirely of brass vines and clock hands. In its center, a pendulum swayed lazily, suspended in midair, glowing with soft gold light. Hassan reached toward it instinctively. "This must be the heart," he whispered. "The heart of the mechanism?" He nodded. "Every clock has one. It's where movement begins. But this one feels different. It's alive." The pendulum's motion slowed as if responding to his voice. Each swing made a soft chime, not metallic, but warm like the sound of her laughter. "She used to hum while I worked," he said. "That same rhythm." Layla tilted her head. "Maybe she left her song here for you to find." The pendulum's glow brightened, flooding the space around them with golden light. Suddenly, shapes began to rise from the garden floor gears spinning, threads of starlight weaving through them like veins. The air pulsed. And then, a voice soft, distant, like the echo of a memory carried by wind. "Hassan!" He froze. His breath hitched. "No." But it was unmistakable. The voice was hers. Layla took a step back, her heart racing. The garden shimmered again, and from the heart of the pendulum, light unfolded into a figure not solid, not ghostly, but formed of radiant mist and starlight. It was her. The woman from his memories, the one he had loved, the one he had lost. She stood before him, her hair moving like ribbons of moonlight, her eyes bright and tender. "Hassan," she said again, her smile trembling. "You remembered the key." He took a slow step toward her, tears filling his eyes. "I never forgot. How could I?" Her laughter was soft, shimmering. "You waited too long. I didn't know how to let you go." "You weren't meant to," she said gently. "You were meant to keep building, to keep time breathing." He hesitated. "Is this real?" She reached out her hand. Though her fingers were made of light, when they touched his palm, warmth spread through him, the warmth of morning shared, of whispered plans, of home. "Real," she whispered, "more real than you think." Layla watched silently, tears slipping down her cheeks. The entire garden seemed to hold its breath, the stars dimming in reverence. "I made the clock to hold you," Hassan said, voice breaking. "To keep your presence close." She shook her head softly. "You didn't make it to hold me, Hassan. You made it to free me, to remind the world that love doesn't stop when the clocks do." He closed his eyes, his forehead touching her luminous hand. "Then why did it stay silent for so long?" Because it was waiting for you to stop listening to time, she said, her voice like a calm river, and start listening to yourself. He looked up at her, and for the first time in years, his heart felt light, not because he had found her again, but because he finally understood that she had never truly been gone. The air shimmered again, and Layla felt the pulse of energy ripple through her body. The garden began to shift, flowers bending, clocks turning, everything moving toward the great pendulum as though answering a summons. "What's happening?" she asked. The woman smiled. "Every clock has a moment when it must reset, not to forget, but to begin again. This is that moment." Hassan looked around, panic flickering in his eyes. "Will you vanish?" "I'll return," she said softly. "Not as I was, but in every tick, in every spark of creation you touch. I will live in the rhythm you build." He reached for her, but she gently pushed his hand down. "You've done what you promised. You kept the silence alive until it could sing again." Layla stepped closer. "If the clock resets, what happens to this place?" The woman turned to her. "It becomes memory, and memory becomes time." Then to Hassan she said, "Wind the pendulum one last time." His hands trembled as he approached it. The key still lay warm in his palm. He inserted it into the pendulum's base and turned it slowly, each movement echoing like the sound of a heart being restarted. As the mechanism engaged, the entire garden erupted in light. The gears spun faster, the stars flared, and the humming grew into a deep, resonant chord that seemed to vibrate through every living cell. The woman's form began to dissolve into motes of light, scattering across the air. "Don't go," Hassan whispered. "I'm not going," her voice replied, though her shape was fading. "I'm just returning." And then she was gone, but the garden didn't dim. Instead, it grew brighter. When the light finally receded, Layla found herself back in the workshop. The air smelled faintly of rain and jasmine. The clocks on the walls were ticking, but differently. Their rhythm was harmonious now, as though they all shared the same pulse. The silent clock stood before them, glowing faintly from within. Its hands had begun to move. Hassan stared at it in awe. "She's keeping time again." Layla smiled gently. "No, you both are." The clock's face shimmered, and for a moment the constellation of the map of returning flickered once more, then rearranged itself into something new. A pattern neither of them had seen before, but somehow both understood. A pattern of continuation. Days passed. The rain cleared. The workshop felt alive again. People began to visit, travelers, scholars, strangers drawn by rumor. They came to see the clock that had once been silent, and the clockmaker who had brought it back to life. Each who entered felt something unexplainable, a stillness, a warmth, as if the room remembered them before they arrived. Layla stayed, helping Hassan document the clock's design, the patterns it revealed, the moments it seemed to whisper. Together they studied how time breathed, not as numbers, but as memory. One evening, as the sun set and the shop bathed in amber light, Layla asked, "What will you do now?" Hassan smiled softly. "Build again. But not clocks to count, time clocks to remember it." He turned to her. "And you?" "I'll write," she said, her voice steady, "about what I saw here, not for history, for hearts." He nodded. "Good. Let them know time is more than what passes. It's what returns." Later that night, long after Layla had gone to rest, Hassan sat alone in the quiet shop. He looked around, every clock ticking gently in perfect harmony. He smiled, then reached for the silent clock, now alive with light. He touched its glass face, whispering softly, "Thank you." The faintest chime answered him, a single, clear note that lingered in the air like a heartbeat. And though he knew she was gone, he felt her presence all the same, not as loss, but as rhythm, as continuation. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the ticking surround him like the sound of waves. The night deepened. stars scattering across the sky outside. And within the shop, the clocks kept singing, each tick a word, each tock a breath, carrying forward the story of love, loss, and time reborn. When morning came, Layla found a small note on the workbench beside the clock. The rain had returned to whispering hours. But it was a different kind of rain, not the heavy, endless kind that soaked roofs and silenced birds, but the soft, thoughtful kind that seemed to fall in rhythm with memory itself. Each drop on the window pane sounded deliberate, like a word written in water. Layla sat at the workbench in the clock shop, her journal open beside the still glowing clock. The ink shimmered faintly in the lamplight, and beside her lay fragments of Hassan's sketches, constellations, drawn through gears, spirals of numbers that made no mathematical sense, yet pulsed with a strange harmony. It had been 3 days since the night of light, the night the clock had awakened and the garden had dissolved. Hassan hadn't spoken much since then. He worked quietly, moving like a man who had just remembered how to breathe after years of forgetting. Now he stood by the window, gazing out at the rain as though searching for something between the falling drops. "You're writing again," he said softly, not turning around. "I'm trying," Layla replied, brushing her pen against the paper. "But words feel smaller than what happened." He nodded. "That's how time feels too, once you see it." She looked up at him. "Do you ever wonder if we changed something that night? Not just in here, but out there?" Hassan's reflection shimmered faintly in the window. "Change?" he murmured. "No, I think we only remembered what was already true." Layla frowned. "And what was that?" "That time and memory aren't enemies," he said, turning to face her. "They're partners. One records, the other repeats together, they make meaning." She smiled faintly, tapping her pen. "You sound more like a philosopher every day." He laughed quietly. "And you sound more like a storyteller." Later that evening, after the shop had grown dim, Layla began sorting through the old drawers beneath the counter. She was looking for fresh ink when she found something unexpected, a wooden box carved with the same symbol that appeared on the silent clock, a spiral of stars surrounding a small keyhole. She turned to Hassan. "What's this?" He froze. "Where did you find that?" "In the bottom drawer. It looks ancient." He walked over slowly, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for it. "I thought I'd lost this decades ago." "What is it?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed the box gently on the table and brushed his fingers along the carvings. The wood was warm, alive almost, pulsing faintly under his touch. "It's a library," he said finally. Layla blinked. "A library? In a box?" "A library of hours," he said softly. "Every clock I ever made, every piece of time I shaped has a trace, an echo. This box holds them." She leaned closer, studying the spiral design. "So it's memory." "Something like it," he replied. "When time becomes too heavy to hold, it leaves its weight here." He reached for the small brass key that hung from a chain around his neck, the same one that had awakened the silent clock, and slid it into the box's keyhole. With a soft click, the lid opened. Light spilled out, not harsh or blinding, but gentle like dawn seen through thin curtains. Inside were dozens of small vials, each filled with liquid light that pulsed faintly, as if each one held a heartbeat. "What are these?" Layla whispered. "Ours," Hassan said, "saved from fading." She reached for one, and the moment her fingers brushed the glass, she saw a vision brief and bright, a boy laughing as he watched his mother wind a pocket watch, a man standing beneath a blooming almond tree, sunlight in his eyes, a child learning to count seconds by tracing raindrops down a window. Layla gasped and nearly dropped the vial. "They're people's memories," she breathed. Hassan nodded. "Every clock listens, remember? When I built them, I didn't realize they were keeping the stories of those who owned them. This box, it gathers what time remembers." She looked down at the glowing vials, hundreds of them, and suddenly felt the weight of their beauty. Each one was a life, a moment, a heartbeat that had been given form. Why keep them? she asked softly. Because time forgets faster than we do, Hassan said, and someone needs to remember. That night, long after Hassan had gone to rest, Layla sat before the open box, her candle burning low. The vials pulsed gently in the dark, filling the room with an ethereal glow. She picked one up, the smallest, shaped like a teardrop. The light inside was a deep, shimmering blue. As soon as she touched it, the world shifted. She was no longer in the shop. She stood beneath a vast night sky, stars swirling in impossible patterns above her. The air shimmered with scent rain, wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of apples. Before her was a man sitting beside a clock tower, carving symbols into wood. His hands were younger, steady, graceful, full of purpose. It was Hassan. She realized with a jolt that she was inside one of his memories. The younger Hassan hummed quietly as he worked, pausing now and then to glance at something behind him. Layla turned and saw her. The woman, the one from the pendulum garden. She was sitting on a nearby bench, watching him with affection. Her presence seemed to fill the air with warmth. "You always hum when you're nervous," she said playfully. He smiled without looking up. "And you always speak when you're supposed to let me concentrate." She laughed. "Then we make a fine pair of interruptions." Hassan looked up then, his eyes bright with the kind of light that can only come from love. "Do you ever think about what happens when time stops?" Her expression softened. "I think time never stops, Hassan. It just waits for us to catch up." He nodded slowly, then returned to his carving. "Then I'll build something that can wait forever." Layla felt her chest tighten. The air shimmered and the scene began to fade. She was back in the workshop, the vial cool and quiet in her hand. The candle flickered low, and outside, the rain had become a steady whisper. For a long time, she sat there in silence, staring at the glowing liquid inside the glass. It wasn't just time he'd built into his clocks. It was love, memory, longing. Every gear, every spring, every tick, each one was a promise to never let what he cherished slip away. And now, she thought, he's trusted me to help carry it. She placed the vial gently back into the box and closed the lid. Morning came with soft light and the smell of fresh bread wafting in from the street. Hassan found her still sitting at the workbench, the wooden box before her, her journal now filled with hurried notes and sketches. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "I saw her. I saw you both." He smiled sadly. "I wondered if the hours would show you that." "It's more than memory," she said. "It's preservation. These are the moments that built you." "And now they build you," he said gently. "You carry them forward." She frowned. "Carry them? To where?" Hassan turned toward the shelves behind him, pulling out a map not of land or sea, but of stars. At its center was a faint spiral, drawn with ink so old it had nearly faded. "To the place where time goes when it's ready to rest," he said. "The Library of Forgotten Hours." Layla blinked. "That sounds like something out of a myth." He chuckled softly. "It is a myth until you find it." She leaned forward. "And you think we can?" "I think we must," he said simply. "Every clock, every hour in that box, they're waiting, and the library waits for them." He looked at her with quiet certainty. "It's not enough to remember. We have to return memory to where it belongs." Layla closed her journal slowly. "Then tell me where to start." Hassan smiled. "At the edge of time." That evening they prepared. Hassan gathered the keys in the box. Layla packed ink, parchment, and her journal. Outside, the rain stopped, leaving the streets gleaming under a silver moon. As they stepped out of the workshop, the bell above the door chimed once a soft, familiar sound, as though the clocks themselves wished them farewell. The road ahead curved past the town's edge and into the forest, where time seemed to stretch differently. Each step they took echoed softly, as if the world beneath them was hollow, a bridge between now and never. "Will we know it when we see it?" Layla asked. Yes, Hassan said. You'll feel it. The air will go quiet, not the silence of absence, but of listening. And somewhere in that silence, they would find it. The place where forgotten hours waited to be remembered again. The storm that had rolled in from the sea had passed, leaving the world washed clean, glistening with dew and light. Yet inside the workshop, time itself trembled. Every pendulum seemed to sway in unison. Every gear hummed a secret vibration. And at the center of it all, Elias stood before the great clock, hands trembling. He placed his palm on the glass dome. Beneath it, the mechanism pulsed with an inner light, like a sleeping heart about to awaken. He could hear it now, the faint echo of his father's voice. Not as a ghostly whisper, but as a memory pressed into the gears, carried through the brass, resonating through his own heartbeat. Every clock you make, my boy, is a mirror of your soul, but only one will ever hold your truth. Elias whispered, then this must be mine. He reached for the silver key. The air was so still that even the candles refused to flicker. He turned the key once, click, and the room seemed to draw in a breath. Another turn, click, and the glow within the clock deepened, spreading in gentle ripples through the workshop. For a heartbeat, everything went silent. Then, tick, a single, perfect tick that filled the entire room. It was not the sound of metal against metal. It was the sound of life itself resuming. The great clock had awakened. The walls shimmered. The clocks surrounding him began to tick in rhythm, each one aligning with the pulse of the great clock. The sound was hypnotic, like 1,000 heartbeats merging into one steady rhythm. And then, time unfolded. The air rippled before him like the surface of a lake. Through it, Elias saw glimpses, not dreams, but memories suspended between seconds. His father at the old bench, carving the first gear of the great clock. His mother smiling as she painted the dial face in gold leaf. Himself as a boy falling asleep on a stool as the clock sang around him. He saw everything that had been forgotten, every tick lost in the noise of life, every heartbeat swallowed by silence. But then came something new. A vision of the village, years from now. The clock tower restored, its bell ringing with a sound that healed rather than marked. Children laughing beneath its chime. An old woman pausing her walk just to listen. Time not as a chain, but as a melody. Elias fell to his knees. So this is what it was meant for, he whispered. Not to measure time, but to mend it. The great clock glowed brighter, and the pendulum's swing slowed, then steadied again. He realized it wasn't just tracking hours or days. It was aligning moments. Every soul, every memory, every lost second that had ever drifted through the air was being brought back into harmony. The workshop's walls dissolved into stars. He found himself standing in an endless expanse where clocks floated like constellations. Some were small and simple, pocket watches, sand timers, sundials, while others were vast, planetary in scale. Each one ticked with a different rhythm, yet somehow they all belonged to the same song. A soft voice spoke behind him. You have wound the heart of time, Elias. He turned, and there stood his father, just as he remembered him, hands dusted with gold filings, eyes warm and weary. Elias wanted to speak, but emotion choked him. His father smiled gently. You've done what even I could not. You've learned to listen. Tears filled Elias's eyes. I only followed what you began. I missed you. And I missed you, my son. But the clocks we make are never truly gone. Each one carries a part of us forward. You've given our craft back its soul. Elias stepped closer. What happens now? Now, his father said, glancing toward the horizon of ticking stars. You learn the truth of time. It doesn't move forward or backward. It breathes. And when you let it breathe with you, you become timeless. The great clock's face appeared behind his father, vast as a moon. Its hands began to spin slowly, counterclockwise. Around Elias, the constellations of clocks followed suit, their rhythms softening, until the sound became almost like wind through leaves. Then came the stillness again. His father reached out, resting a hand over Elias's heart. This is the only clock that ever mattered. As long as it beats, time will listen. Light enveloped them both. When Elias opened his eyes, he was back in the workshop. The storm had cleared completely, and dawn light poured through the windows. The great clock stood before him, serene and silent, the faint hum of its energy woven into the air. Yeah, he didn't know how long he had been there. Hours, maybe days, but it didn't matter. Time no longer pressed upon him. It felt light, flowing, free. He looked around. Every clock in the room had stopped ticking. Yet he could sense they weren't broken. They were resting, waiting, breathing. Elias smiled softly. So this is peace. He walked outside. The village below shimmered in golden morning light. The old tower's bell was silent now, but it no longer felt mournful. The stillness was full, alive. He returned to his bench, picked up his tools, and began to carve a new piece. Small, delicate, almost invisible. Not a gear this time, but a charm. On it, he engraved the words, "Every second is a song." As he worked, he hummed softly, the melody of the clocks echoing within him. The air felt warm, like a long-forgotten memory returning home. And then something subtle happened. The smallest clock on his shelf, a tiny one shaped like a teardrop, began to tick. Once, softly. Then again. Then another joined it. One by one, the clocks began to stir, each finding its rhythm. But now they didn't tick in unison. Each one played its own tempo, its own song, some fast, some slow, some so faint they were like whispers. Together they formed a tapestry of time, a symphony of life itself. Elias leaned back and listened, eyes half closed, a faint smile on his lips. It was no longer the ticking of machinery. It was the pulse of existence, chaotic, imperfect, beautiful. And somewhere deep within the great clock, something glimmered, a soft heartbeat of light that pulsed with the rhythm of the world. Elias stood, walked over, and placed his hand on its side. "Rest now," he murmured. "Your work is done." The light within it dimmed gently, like a candle lowering itself into peace. Outside, the first birds began to sing. He stepped into the sunlight, breathing in the scent of rain-washed earth and sea. His workshop stood quietly behind him, filled with sleeping clocks and whispers of eternity. He did not need to look back. He carried them all with him now. The clocks, the songs, the moments. Every second a story, every breath a lifetime. As he walked down the cobbled path, his footsteps fell into a rhythm that matched the ticking still echoing in his heart. He no longer measured time. He lived it. And from that moment on, the village would say that the clockmaker's shop at the edge of the square never truly went silent. Even when its doors were closed and its windows dark, they swore they could still hear it, a faint, peaceful ticking, like the heartbeat of time itself. The air in the village had changed. It wasn't something one could measure or define. It was softer somehow, lighter, as though time itself had taken a deep breath and exhaled. The mornings no longer felt hurried. The evenings stretched like warm silk. The bell of the old tower no longer rang, yet every villager swore they could feel its chime deep in their bones, a pulse that reminded them of something simple and eternal, peace. At the edge of the square, the clockmaker's shop remained as it always had been, its windows fogged by early mist, its door half open, the faint scent of oil, wood, and rain lingering within. But to those who looked closely, something was undeniably different. The workshop was no longer filled with the anxious ticking of dozens of clocks. Instead, it was filled with silence, a kind, living silence that breathed with the walls. Elias sat at his bench, eyes half closed, carving the final piece of wood he would ever craft. It wasn't a gear, nor a dial, nor a clock at all. It was a small bird, a nightingale poised as if ready to take flight. His hands worked with a serenity that came only from those who had made peace with time. Each motion was slow, precise, and filled with reverence. The knife glided through the grain as if it already knew what form it was meant to take. Outside, the morning sun touched the rooftops, and the world woke gently. A soft knock came at the door. Elias didn't look up. "It's open," he said, his voice calm and low, like a note played on a cello. The door creaked, and a small figure stepped in, a girl of perhaps 10, wearing a blue scarf too large for her, clutching a broken pocket watch in her hands. Her eyes were wide with hesitation. Are you the clockmaker?" she asked softly. Elias smiled faintly. "Once, perhaps," he said. "Now I'm something else. But tell me, what brings you here, little one?" She held out the pocket watch, its chain tangled, its glass cracked. "It was my grandfather's," she said. "It stopped working last winter. Mama said it can't be fixed anymore, but I thought maybe—" Elias reached for it gently. The moment he touched it, the watch hummed faintly, as if recognizing him. He turned it in his palm, examined the dented brass case, and smiled. "This one's seen many days," he said, "and many stories." The girl nodded solemnly. "He used to say it was magic. He said when you listen to it, you can hear the stars move." Elias chuckled, his eyes soft. He wasn't wrong. He turned to his bench and began to work. Not hurriedly, not with the mechanical focus of a tradesman, but with a gentle rhythm. As he adjusted the inner spring and polished the cracked glass, he began to speak. Not to the girl, but to the air itself. "You see," he said quietly, "time doesn't break. It bends. It folds itself around memories. Sometimes we think something has stopped, but really it's only resting, waiting to be heard again." The girl watched, mesmerized. The golden gears shimmered faintly under his touch, though there was no candle lit on the table. Elias's movements were fluid, almost musical. The soft click-click of his tools sounded like a lullaby. Finally, he closed the watch, handed it back, and said, "Listen." She lifted it to her ear. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, tick, a faint, perfect rhythm. Tick, tick. Her eyes widened. "It's alive." Elias smiled, though there was a quiet sadness behind it. "Yes, but it's not the watch that's alive, child. It's you. It only needed your heartbeat to find its way again." She frowned slightly, not quite understanding, but smiled anyway. "Thank you, sir." As she turned to leave, Elias called out, "Tell your mother something for me, will you?" She turned back, expectant. "Tell her," he said softly, "that every second she's ever loved still exists. Time never forgets kindness." The girl nodded, her blue scarf fluttering as she ran down the cobbled street. Elias watched her go until she vanished around the corner. Then he turned back to his bench and looked at the nightingale carving. It was finished, perfect in its stillness. He placed it beside the great clock, which now rested quietly against the far wall. It hadn't moved since the night he wound it, yet it emanated a faint light, a soft golden heartbeat pulsing through the metal. He sat down before it, folded his hands, and whispered, "It's time, isn't it?" The great clock's hands shifted, just slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if in answer. Elias closed his eyes. The world around him began to blur, like a watercolor dissolving in rain. He felt the floor beneath him fade, the walls stretch into starlight. When he opened his eyes again, he was standing once more in the expanse of the ticking stars. But this time, the constellations were different. They weren't clocks anymore. They were hearts, thousands of them, suspended in the dark, each beating with its own unique rhythm. Some fast and bright, others slow and dim. Yet together they formed a single great pulse. He realized then what his father had meant all along. Time wasn't measured in hours. It was measured in heartbeats, in moments of connection, of kindness, of love that transcends its own passing. As he walked among the lights, he saw faces within them, people he had known, loved, and even those he had never met. The villagers, his mother, his father, and the girl with the blue scarf, her heart glowing brightly in the constellation of souls. He smiled. "So this is the true clock," he whispered, "not bound to walls or gears, but to us." A familiar presence appeared beside him, his father once again, though now his form seemed woven from light itself. "You've come far," the elder clockmaker said, voice warm as ever. "You've given time back its meaning." Elias looked at him, eyes shimmering. "I didn't fix time. I just stopped trying to control it." His father nodded approvingly. "And that is how you mend it." Elias turned toward the horizon. In the distance, a great bell shimmered, massive, radiant, suspended in the air like a moon made of sound. With every slow toll, waves of light rippled across the void. "What is that?" Elias asked. "The final hour," his father said. "The moment when every heartbeat aligns." Elias hesitated. "And what happens when it does?" His father smiled gently. "Peace, true peace. But you must choose it. Once you cross that threshold, you won't return, not as you were." Elias looked down at his hands, calloused, worn, yet steady. The hands that had built, repaired, and held onto time for so long. He exhaled slowly. "I've spent my life fixing clocks," he said softly. "Maybe it's time I let one fix me." His father placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then go, my son. The final hour awaits." The bell's sound grew deeper, drawing him forward. The light pulsed through the stars, through the hearts, through his own chest. With every step he took, he felt his memories unfurling behind him. The laughter of the villagers, the storm, the workshop's warmth, the first gear he ever carved. And beneath it all, that one eternal rhythm. Tick, tock, tick, tock. But now it no longer counted seconds. It counted grace. Elias reached the base of the bell. It was immense, engraved with symbols older than time itself. Spirals, stars, and a single phrase written in the old clockmaker's script. All moments returned to silence. He placed his hand on the metal. It thrummed beneath his fingers like the skin of a drum. He looked back once more. His father smiled faintly and nodded. The light from the bell wrapped around him, lifting him slowly from the ground. For a moment, Elias felt weightless, neither alive nor gone, simply becoming. The stars began to revolve around him, each one chiming in harmony. The constellations turned like the gears of a divine mechanism, and in that motion, he saw it all. Every birth, every death, every heartbeat that had ever existed. All of it was part of one great breathing clock. He smiled, tears glistening in the light. And then the bell struck once more. Its sound was not loud. It was soft, infinite, a note that carried through every soul, every grain of dust, every drop of rain. The final hour had begun. The toll of the bell echoed through the vast expanse like a ripple through eternity. Each vibration carried warmth, not sound, a resonance that felt like the first heartbeat after silence. Elias floated within it, the light surrounding him neither blinding nor bright, but perfectly soft, like dawn's first breath. The vastness stretched endlessly, and yet he felt no fear. For the first time in his life, he wasn't counting the seconds. He was living inside one. Below him, the constellations of hearts began to move, drawn together by the bell's tone. They pulsed and shimmered, weaving themselves into a spiral, a living galaxy of memory, compassion, and time's essence. Each light merged with the next until it became a luminous current, flowing toward the great bell, which pulsed brighter with every rhythm. Elias understood then that this was not an ending. It was a synchronization. He placed his hand over his heart, feeling its steady rhythm, and whispered, "Let time breathe." At that, the bell gave one final toll. The sound cascaded through the stars, through every clock, every soul still beating in the world below. The night sky over the village shimmered, and people stirred from their sleep, not out of alarm, but from an unspoken pull, as if some ancient, benevolent truth had brushed their dreams. Children stirred and smiled in their beds. Mothers woke briefly to the scent of rain and the memory of lullabies. The elderly opened their eyes to see moonlight dancing across their walls, feeling for the first time in years that the weight of age had lifted. Time for that single, eternal moment was whole. Back in the clockmaker's workshop, the great clock began to glow again. Not violently, not with power, but with peace. Its pendulum moved once, then rested in perfect balance. The nightingale carving that sat beside it shimmered with faint golden light, and then, impossibly, its wooden wings fluttered. It took flight. The bird rose into the air, feathers soft and luminous, circling the room once before slipping through the open window and into the dawn sky. Its song, gentle, melodic, ancient, spread across the village. People stepped from their homes, drawn to the sound. They looked upward to see the small, glowing nightingale soaring high above, its voice threading through the air like silk. And as it sang, the first rays of morning touched the clock tower. The hands upon its face began to move again, slow, deliberate, golden in the light. When the bell finally chimed, it was unlike any sound the village had ever heard. It wasn't just marking the hour, it was blessing it. The villagers stood in silence, many with tears in their eyes, unsure why they felt both joy and longing all at once. They did not know what had changed, but they felt it. The rhythm of life had softened, deepened, become more human. A young boy tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mama," he said, "it sounds happy now." She nodded, eyes glistening. "Yes," she whispered, "it does." Inside the workshop, Elias was no longer there. The bench was empty, save for his tools neatly arranged, and a single folded cloth resting where his hands had been. Beneath it lay a note, written in the soft curve of his handwriting. "Do not fear the passing of moments. They do not leave you. They wait to be remembered." Beneath the note sat the small silver key. No one found it for many years. The shop remained untouched, preserved by the villagers who could not bring themselves to disturb it. Some said that on certain nights, if you pressed your ear against the door, you could still hear faint ticking, slow, patient, alive. And others swore that when the moon hung low and the air was still, they could see a figure inside, bent over the workbench, his hands glowing faintly as he polished something unseen. But those were just stories, or so they said. Years passed. Seasons folded and unfolded like the gears of a celestial clock. Children grew, elders passed, the world shifted gently on. Yet the rhythm of the village never again fell out of harmony. Every festival, the villagers lit lanterns and set them afloat down the river in honor of the clockmaker's hour. They didn't do it out of duty or superstition, but out of gratitude, because something in their hearts still pulsed to his rhythm. The festival became tradition, and over time, legend. They told the tale to their children, the man who fixed time not by stopping it, but by listening to it. The man who built a clock that breathed like a heart and sang like the stars. And though the details shifted with each telling, some said he had spoken to angels, others that he had built a doorway through time, the message always remained the same. Peace was found, not in control, but in surrender. Far beyond the world, where stars breathed and memories lingered, Elias drifted within the golden light of the final hour. He no longer felt bound by flesh or form, yet he still carried his heartbeat, steady, gentle, infinite. Around him, the galaxy of hearts glowed in quiet unity. Some pulsed faster, some slower, but none were lost. Each one contributed to the grand rhythm of creation, the song of existence. He looked toward the bell once more. Its light had softened, no longer immense but intimate, like a lantern flickering in the dark. From within it, he heard a familiar voice. "Elias." He turned. His father stood again before him, not distant this time, but clear, real, whole. "You have seen the truth of time," the elder said, his eyes warm. "You understand now that endings are not to be feared." Elias nodded. "Only transformed." "Yes," his father said. Every tick becomes a talk, every breath becomes silence, and silence becomes the beginning again. Elias smiled. Then this isn't goodbye. It never is, his father said softly. It's only another winding. They stood together, looking upon the vast clockwork of stars. The harmony pulsed gently, infinite. Then his father placed a hand on Elias's shoulder once more. It's time for you to leave the workshop behind. The world below has learned your rhythm now. They will carry it forward. Elias hesitated. And you? I am already where I must be. I am part of every tick, every echo, every breath that ever was. The light between them brightened, and for a moment Elias felt the pull of stillness calling him, not away but deeper, inward, towards something that had no edge. He closed his eyes, whispered, "Thank you," and let himself dissolve into the rhythm. The stars pulsed once more, their light expanding outward like a slow exhale. And then peace. Not silence, not absence, just peace. The final hour completed its toll, and all that remained was harmony. Years became decades. The story of the Clockmaker endured, passed down through generations like a quiet inheritance. And though the old shop eventually fell to age, the villagers rebuilt it stone by stone, preserving it not as a place of work, but as a sanctuary of stillness. Pilgrims came from far away to sit in that silence, to feel the calm that lingered in the air. Some said that if you listened long enough, the walls whispered the ticking of the great clock, a rhythm that could slow the racing mind and ease the troubled heart. And above the mantel, in a glass case, they placed the nightingale carving. It never moved again, but when moonlight touched it, its eyes glimmered faintly, as though remembering flight. And so the story of Elias, the clockmaker who mended time, became a legend, a bedtime tale whispered to children as they fell asleep beneath starlit skies. Parents would whisper, "Listen, and you can still hear him." And sometimes, if the night was still enough, they truly could. A faint tick, talk blending with the sound of waves, the rustle of trees, the beating of their own hearts. Because Elias had not disappeared. He had simply become part of the rhythm that held the universe together. Every breath, every moment of kindness, every act of forgiveness was his work continuing, gears turning in the unseen clock of eternity. And when dawn broke, the sun itself seemed to rise to his rhythm, slow, steady, golden. The clock tower bell would chime once more, not as a command, not as a countdown, but as a greeting. And somewhere beyond the edge of time, in the endless silence between ticks, Elias smiled. For time was no longer something he measured. It was something he was. And so, as the last echo of the clock fades into the stillness of the night, we leave behind the quiet village of Eldenmere, where time, memory, and dreams have gently intertwined. The clockmaker's secret wasn't just about fixing broken hours. It was about mending the moments within us all. Perhaps somewhere deep in your own heart, a small clock is still ticking, steady, peaceful, timeless. As you drift into your dreams tonight, may the rhythm of those gentle gears guide you toward calm, toward rest, toward endless peace. Thank you for listening, dreamer. Until next time, sleep deeply, breathe softly, and let time rest with you.